when you say slasher movies, that's when the killer became the star.
Don't go in there!
Halloween, it happens to be the Cadillac of slasher movies.
You don't know what it is that makes Michael Myers go, her.
Psycho was the first time I was aware of the editing.
The assembly of pieces of film to create fright.
Texas Chainsaw Massacre is one of the most important movies.
That ratchets up horror to a whole other level.
Yeah. That's the one that defined me.
Sometimes you just want to sit down and watch Jason take out a lot of stupid teenagers.
There are a number of pictures where you're able to actually take your deepest, most antisocial impulses for a walk.
Horror became a dirty word in the late 70s, early 80s.
These films hate women.
55% of that audience was women.
They're the final girls. That's who you identify with.
There's the moment in Halloween where I'm standing behind this house. I don't know anybody yet. I'm 19 years old and saying to myself, what am I doing? How do I do this? And then you hear, all right, everybody, here we go. We're rolling. Camera's rolling. And I have to start screaming. And I had never screamed in my life. Who screams? Who screams?
I suppose for a lot of people who grew up on Friday the 13th, Halloween, Scream, horror equals gore.
You have the idea that all horror films are slasher films, which is wrong, and then you have the idea that slasher films are purely misogynistic and that the only people who watch them are men, and that's also wrong.
The most extreme form of horror films, slashers, have been vilified since they first came on the scene, but they have also been tremendously popular. The worst of them can still be entertaining. The best of them tell us brutal truths about ourselves, our fears, and our secret desires.
In 1974, Bob Clark comes in with Black Christmas. That is the first POV of slasher, girls in the sorority house, over the holiday. That becomes sort of the precursor to John Carpenter, who comes in with Halloween.
Halloween technically is a slasher movie, but it happens to be the Cadillac of slasher movies.
Halloween also made horror films mainstream. It was one of the ones that people who don't like horror movies still watch.
Halloween is remarkably effective. Like, from the opening long take of a child looking through a mask.
A young boy murders his sister and is put away in a mental institution. And 16 years later, he escapes and comes back to the town and to the scene of the crime.
And over the course of Halloween Day, Michael Myers slowly lets his presence known to Laurie Strode.
This is rare in a lot of horror films, actually, like a likable lead. You know, in Friday the 13th, you want most of those actors to die. You don't want Jamie Lee Curtis to die. You want Jamie Lee Curtis to survive.
I think it all had to do with emotion. John said very clearly what he wanted. He said, I really want her vulnerability. It's why he cast me, apparently. And I didn't really understand that at 19. And I learned what John meant when I went and saw the movie in Hollywood at a theater. There's the sequence where Laurie Strode leaves the babysitting house. And there's this long walk between the two houses. And of course, the entire audience started screaming, "Don't go in there!" And that's when I understood what John was going for, was that you cared enough about her that you would tell her, don't do this.
So much of horror is about mood, atmosphere, and cinematic style. John Carpenter using the wide screen and the Panaglide camera, starting with Halloween, it's something that makes the film that much more effective.
When I met John, I was immediately impressed that he wanted to use the camera to tell the story rather than just a recording device. The Steadicam, the Panaglide at the time, was one of those tools that John and I looked at as being a key technique, moving the camera fluidly.
You didn't know where Michael Myers was. You know, you saw him outside, and then you'd be in making out, you know, on a couch, and it's like, okay, he's out there someplace.
Like, you'll watch a lot of these movies and you're not scared anymore. But when you think like Michael Myers, like, I was freaked out for years. Just the idea of some just dude popping out of places and murdering you real quick.
Michael Myers is the human being that's actually a wolf wearing a human face. You know, the human that just ain't human.
What you saw in the sequels was an attempt to kind of shoehorn in other characters or other mythologies just to make it more interesting.
In Halloween 2, they make it that Laurie and Michael Myers are brother and sister.
That Strode girl, that's Michael Myers' sister.
He's not her brother. She's not his sister. That's just bull. Nobody was coming from that point of view when they were making the first one. And what makes the first one so good is the fact that you don't know what it is that makes Michael Myers go, her.
Halloween was one of the first films to really initiate the final girl as a trope. A main character who's a woman who is first a victim and ultimately a survivor who fights back. It's a formula that really worked. And it's become so common that I think most people don't even think about it.
All right, upstairs, get Lindsay, lock the bedroom door. Do as I say!
It's pure. There's something very pure and clean about it. Innocence and danger coming together with that music and that camera work and the performances is why I think we're still talking about it today.
John Carpenter's Halloween launched the slasher boom of the 80s. Its influence is still felt today, but it didn't come out of nowhere.
Good evening. I have some news that will delight you. Murder is not dead.
Starting with Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho in 1960, we started seeing a new approach to horror. It was the horror that didn't come out of some grotesque radioactive anomaly, but it could be lurking next door. A nice young man like Norman Bates could be the new Frankenstein, the new Dracula.
Do you go out with friends?
Well, a boy's best friend is his mother.
Hitch always thought it was a comedy. He always claimed that.
The content as such was, I felt, rather amusing.
My mother, what is the phrase? She isn't quite herself today.
But it's very perverted and very sick.
There's hangers in the closet and stationery with Bates Motel printed on it in case you want to make your friends back home feel envious. And the, over there.
The bathroom.
Yeah.
One of the big things that I think to this day was still shocking about Psycho was you kill the protagonist 40 minutes into the movie. Even knowing that the shower scene was coming, I was like, wait, she can't be the one who gets killed.
There's so much movie left.
Psycho raised terror to a level that I had never seen anyway, because it was neo-realistic. Before Psycho, that was not imaginable, that level of terror. Psycho and Hitchcock brought terror into your shower.
Psycho was the first time I was aware of the editing. And how your mind gets tricked and what you see off camera.
This process of frightening is done by means of a given medium, the medium of pure cinema. The assembly of pieces of film to create fright.
That shower scene is one of the most iconic pieces of cinema ever to be created. So much so that it's burned in people's brains who haven't even seen the movie. People know that Bernard Herrmann score, the you know, kids grow up like doing that with that sound, not knowing what it's from. Like, talk about having made a cultural impact.
Bernard Herrmann's score to the film was very dramatic, very propulsive. It's virtually impossible for a horror composer not to have to wrestle with the Psycho score. You cannot avoid it. You have to deal with it.
In 1960, I'm sure people regarded the shower scene in Psycho as having gone too far. Like, Alfred Hitchcock's gone too far this time. But it's indelible. They're indelible images, and they're, like, forever, like, sort of in your brain, and, like, people have bad dreams thinking about those movies.
John Carpenter, you know, was greatly influenced by Psycho, even to the point of casting Janet Leigh's daughter, Jamie Lee Curtis, in the lead role.
Ironic that it's same genre, same family. Obviously, it was the biggest thing in her life, as I know that Halloween is mine. So when I jokingly say to you, Halloween actress dies, that's what it will say. Nothing else. Just like my mom, Psycho actress dies.
Because of Hitchcock, people will accept cinema first in a thriller. In a way they won't accept it in a love story. In a way they won't accept it in a period drama. In a way they won't accept it in almost most every other genre. Because Hitchcock taught people to be thinking of cinema first. We're just naturally okay with the camera taking off and doing things.
I think it's fair to say that Psycho was a turning point. Certainly in American filmmaking and Hollywood filmmaking, because there was no one more establishment than Alfred Hitchcock. And there was no turning back. There was no turning back.
Psycho influenced every horror film to come, and it paved the way for a new kind of movie monster, the chainsaw-wielding serial killer.
If you think about the landmarks, Psycho and Halloween, clearly the bridge between the two is Tobe Hooper's The Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
Yeah. Out of every movie that we've talked about, that's the one that defined me. Like, that's everything I wanted in a movie and everything I ever wanted to do with movies. It was just disgusting and nasty, and that redneck thing.
Relentless.
That movie just changed the way I thought about movies.
Yeah.
Instantly.
I decided to rewatch Texas Chainsaw Massacre like a month ago. I watched it 8 times.
Texas Chainsaw Massacre is one of the most important movies to me of all horror films.
You walk into a movie called Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and you expect the worst, and you get it. It was incredibly potent and visceral. There was an imagination, a dark imagination that had no limits.
The film which you are about to see is an account of the tragedy which befell a group of 5 youths.
It just starts with that great, like, dreadful, somber narration at the beginning of the story.
The events of that day were to lead to the discovery of one of the most bizarre crimes in the annals of American history, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
So right off the bat, you're thinking, wow, is this based on a true story? And then they flash this date.
It really feels like you were dropped into watching something happen for real.
This heat is just driving me crazy. I don't know if I can take much more. The condition.
Texas Chainsaw Massacre was the first one where I thought they were real people.
Yeah.
I never looked at them as actors. You don't see any on-screen violence. It's all implied.
The hook.
When he
puts
picks
some
her
Pam
up
in the meat hook.
and he's holding her over the hook.
And you came out of that movie
Something
certain
about
that you remembered, oh yeah, remember you see the hook go through her.
Yeah.
But your mind just put it all together.
Stop.
Texas Chainsaw is inspired by the Ed Gein story from Wisconsin.
It was a crime that shocked the small town of Plainfield, Wisconsin. Edward Gein accused of killing a woman, then gutting her body like a slaughtered deer.
Toby told me that when he was a kid, they would tell him the story of this guy, Ed Gein.
He would use those body parts and bones to make lampshades and other furniture. He would also wear dead female body parts.
And so they used to use Ed Gein as a cautionary tale. Don't be bad, or Ed Gein will come for you.
Someone once said, before Tobe Hooper, there had been plenty of films about psychopaths. But when you saw Texas Chainsaw Massacre, it was the first time you saw a film that seemed like it had been directed by a psychopath.
Toby, he had a sweetness to him. At the same time, he would try to rip your head off if you messed with the frame of his movie.
If you'll pardon my French, they didn't give a about what people thought about the movie they were making. The conditions of making that movie were so primitive. I mean, these guys, they borrowed 16mm Airflex cameras from the University of Texas under the hottest, worst conditions. It was like 120 degrees, and they were like, let's go out there and stir it up.
It was not a pleasant experience for anyone, and it's reflected in the film. I don't think Tobe Hooper set out to make a movie about Vietnam, but he could not help but reflect the rebellion that was going on.
Subsequent investigation.
The times were political, and the times were, you know, steeped in Vietnam.
The Texas Chainsaw Massacre is a very American story and in some ways a capitalistic story.
The place where they shoot the cattle in the head with that big air gun thing.
Oh, that gun's no good.
I was in there once with my uncle.
What Texas Chainsaw Massacre is really about is a family of dispossessed workers.
With a sledge. See, that was better. They died better that way.
Because of automation and loss of jobs, they no longer have the means, you know, to earn a living for themselves.
With the new way people put out jobs.
The oppressed working class turn the tools of their trade back upon their former employers, the chainsaw, the hammer, and so on. But it's also tied in with psychic repression because, like, people love the meat on their plate but don't want to think about how it gets made. And by substituting the teenagers for the cattle and the former dispossessed workers enacting revenge against them, it's a kind of unrepression both of meat itself and of working class labor.
Toby called that movie a $60,000 flare he shot up from Austin. And I mean, it's in the Museum of Modern Art now. It's a classic, but it's unmatched after that. I mean, that ratchets up horror to a whole other level.
Texas Chainsaw, Halloween, and Psycho opened the gates for a new kind of horror. But the slasher film as we know it was truly born with the most successful horror franchise of all time. Friday the 13th. When you think of Friday the 13th, you think of dead teenagers and the unstoppable Jason Voorhees.
Growing up when I did, we all watched Friday the 13th. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 8 was horrible. But in terms of character names, Jason Voorhees, it oozes evil.
I believe that I have murdered more people on film than any actor in history. I played Jason in 4 of the Friday the 13th films. There's a lot more to playing a character like Jason than throwing the mask on and, you know, walking around threateningly. Because 2 of the major tools an actor uses are their facial expressions and their voice. So now you take away both of those by making him silent and putting a mask on him. So I always was conscious of Jason never looking awkward or off balance or weak. I would never look down to see where I was walking because I thought it weakened the character. My favorite Jason kill, which was my favorite all-time kill for a long time, was the sleeping bag from Part 7. I put my heart and soul into that character and loved playing it.
Name the killer in Friday the 13th.
Jason! Jason! Jason!
I'm sorry. That's the wrong answer.
Jason is synonymous with Friday the 13th, but he's barely seen in the original film. The rest of the formula, though, was in place.
Friday the 13th is a story about a group of camp counselors who've come up to set up a camp.
Well, come on, let's go.
I thought we had 2 weeks.
And have been sort of targeted by a mysterious killer.
One or 2 or 3 of them get picked off, and you say, oh my goodness, anybody could go at any time.
Oh! Something's wrong with Ned.
That was, I think, part of the secret to the suspense that we were able to create.
Must be my imagination.
We needed somebody that knew a lot more than we did about how to pull off a special effect. You're going to stab somebody with a knife. How do you do it? You can't just get a rubber knife and start, you know, going at people. And we were fortunate enough to run into a guy named Tom Savini. And he just couldn't wait to get involved. And he had such wonderful, positive energy.
Kevin Bacon was sitting upright underneath the bed. Only his head came through the bed. So I'm actually pushing the arrow through the fake chest and neck. And my assistant was pumping the blood. Now, while he was pumping the blood, the tubing came off the blood pump. And during the take, he grabbed it and blew through it, which caused the nice gurgling of the blood. So it was a happy accident that made the effect, you know, so much better.
What makes Friday the 13th a classic is the reveal of Mrs. Voorhees.
How are you?
Well, I'm Mrs. Voorhees, an old friend of the Christies.
Everyone's trying to survive as they're being knocked off one by a killer that they don't know, and then you reveal it's the mother of this drowned boy.
You see, Jason was my son.
A mother was driven mad by her child drowning and seeing the world ignore it and go by and think that they can just restart and go on with their lives. The manifestation of grief is actually very poetic and relatable.
we started to hear some of the score that Harry was writing for the first Friday the 13th. And this kept coming up.
You remember a scene at the very end where Mrs. Voorhees, Betsy Palmer, rest her soul, dear Betsy, we hear her son go,
Kill her, Mommy. Kill her.
and that's what kicked it off for me. I went, she hears voices in her head. I went up to a microphone and went, and then it came out, and literally became the signature of that series, the sound that, what they call the Jason sound.
Look what you did to him!
I remember thinking the movie was over. You remember she was on the lake? And I thought I legitimately like, oh, the movie's over. Whew, she's at the boat. He jumped out that water, I lost it. I don't even know how I fell for that. To this day, was the loudest I ever screamed in my life.
The boy, Jason.
Jason? Nobody knew that was going to become a franchise, but it was certainly easy to replicate.
My biggest regret is putting the bag over his head. So then doing part 3, this guy we had hired as a 3D expert was also a hockey player. And I was trying to figure out, I wasn't going to do the bag again. What are we going to do? And one day he walked into my office with a goalie mask. Said, how about this? It was perfect. It was immediately, that was going to be great.
I don't understand how in the first one he's like an 11-year-old who jumps out of the lake, and then he's built like a WCW wrestler. I don't understand what happened where he suddenly got all jacked.
After the first movies and the subsequent sequels became, who are these, awful kids that we sort of hate and we can't wait for Jason to take them out.
I've always thought that the slasher films of the 1980s didn't really work as horror fiction, but they worked pretty well as slapstick comedies. And the reason for that is, the characters are never allowed to be anything except one-dimensional types. You've got a gang of teenagers, you've got the jock, you've got the stoner, you've got the slut, you've got the virgin. You never care about them, you never fall in love with them. And so when the serial killer starts knocking them off one by one, you laugh instead of recoil in horror because he's actually more of a personality than they are.
With the success of Friday the 13th and the success of Halloween, producers were ravenous to find material and knowing that, oh, well, this is the formula.
One of the byproducts of the success of Friday the 13th and a few other movies was that people on the outside looking in saying, oh, they killed 10 people and they made a lot of money. We'll kill 20 people and we'll make a lot more than that.
By the early 80s, slasher movies glutted the market. Audiences loved them, but they also inspired outright hatred. Where some saw harmless entertainment, others saw a threat to society.
Oh, come on, baby. Light my fire.
Bet I will.
I got to tell you something. The worst horror movie I ever saw was great.
Yeah,
Okay,
it's true.
that's the way that I am, because I go in there and I say, what am I going to see? I don't know. A movie that's PG-13, that's a horror movie, it's got to be scary in some way that's really artistic. Once you get to R or once you get to unrated, you're saying, I don't know what I'm going to see.
I got one word for you, maniac.
Maniac is one of my favorite movies, and I had a feeling you'd like it.
Maniac,
Which
oh,
is
of
why,
course.
as a gift for you, I brought you a Maniac figure.
We did not rehearse this, folks. Look.
The Maniac
I'm so
figure.
excited, I almost dropped it. It's a Maniac bloody scalp.
Isn't that sweet? Yeah.
It really is. I mean, I don't know how to thank you for that.
Maniac is about a guy named Frank Zito who's a very oddball character who stalks young women and he scalps them and he takes their scalps home and he puts them on these mannequins, and it is here he sort of struggles with this relationship he had with his mother.
I won't ever let them take you away from me.
It's a very minimalist look at what happens inside the mind of a serial killer.
I mean, the original Maniac is mean, but it's actually really powerful and, thanks to Joe Spinell's performance, kind of emotional.
It really, went too far. You know, watching that movie, you really felt like the killing scenes were really protracted and really brutal and really grim. When that movie came out, it was so controversial. You know, a lot of women were protesting it because this idea that it was misogynistic, of course. You know, it's like all these movies get this label of being misogynistic because the victims are primarily women.
I don't feel like the film's misogynistic at all. As a matter of fact, I feel as a woman, it really represents a realism to me. It's like a cathartic experience in a way because women live in that sort of world every day where we have to be hyper aware of who's around us and what could happen.
Maniac ends with a group of women taking brutal revenge on the killer. Today, many horror fans and film scholars consider it a classic. But in the 80s, Maniac helped set off a moral panic.
Horror became a dirty word, I think, in the late 70s, early 80s, and I think that the reason for that was the explosion of slasher movies.
A new breed of shriek merchants has exploited the once honorable genre of the terror film.
It was a very cheap form of horror entertainment, and those slasher films got a lot of bad press for brutalizing women, for violence, for the gore. And the people making legitimate horror films were afraid that they were going to be tainted by the legacy of a lot of these slasher knockoffs.
I think a lot of people have the wrong idea. They identify these films with earlier thrillers like Psycho, or even a more recent film like Halloween, which we both liked. These films aren't in the same category. These films hate women.
But don't you find that in a really effective horror movie, blood stains the critic's eyes? Like, once you get blood in your eyes, you can't wash it out. They can't see anything else other than the kill. And they also feel like if they like the movie, that they're endorsing that for real, or that kind of violence. So most often, those reviews just become a soapbox. We're like, look, I'm a good person, I'm a good person. I don't like this sort of thing. But the truth is, we love it. It's like, it's the enjoying fantasy, enjoying a scary story. It's like, it's no different from Grimm's fairy tales.
The slasher films celebrate the female character because they're the final girls. The people who survive the slasher movies are the final girls. And that's who you identify with, and that's the smart one. The women are the ones who are smart. It's the sex-crazed guys bringing their girlfriends to have sex that, get slaughtered.
Most of the feminists who were against horror were not really watching these films or analyzing them. They were just sort of like, pornography is bad, horror films are bad, so they weren't actually engaging with the genre.
These women in danger films all really boil down to just one same image, one disturbing image.
a woman screaming in abject terror.
Usually it's the people who don't actually know anything about the topic that are the loudest complainers about it.
And unfortunately, the audiences that go to them don't seem to like women too much either.
In the 80s, the New York Times conducted a poll with theater goers to find out who were seeing these slasher films, and they found out that 45% of the audience was made up of adolescents. 55% of that audience was women.
Maniac, its slasher cousins, and the Reagan assassination attempt triggered a crackdown on realistic violence and gore. By 1984, the golden age of slasher films was over. But audiences still wanted their scares, so filmmakers created a new kind of monster.
Okay, show her. Well, is it a good guy or not? It is. It is.
A good guy!
One of the first experiences of horror was Child's Play.
Hi, I'm Chucky, and I'm your friend to the end. Heidi-ho.
When I first saw that, I was about 4 or 5. So it was just this little doll, and it was cute, and then all of a sudden it just came alive. And it's just always those moments where the camera is moving. But you don't, it's kind of the POV of the doll that just like, it just drove me crazy. And I can be honest, to this day, I'm still affected by that.
Nobody believes you about Chucky unless you start telling the truth. Right now, they're going to take you away from me.
It's about a mother trying to hold her family together to defend her son against this, you know, against the charges of being a murderer. I mean, a 7-year-old boy, horrible. And the boy may be mad. He keeps insisting that his doll is talking to him.
Come on, Chucky, say something. Tell me. Hi, I'm Chucky, and I'm your friend to the end. Heidi-ho. Ha ha ha.
To me, horror is always about violating the sacred. Take a child, something that we all look at and coo over and look after and dote on, and make them the most evil out there. And a child's toy is sacred too. These are things we grow up with, and you basically cast horror's black shadow over all this sacred, righteous stuff.
You stupid bitch! You filthy slut! Did you with me?
In the 1980s, advertisers had started to target children directly.
Brought to you exclusively by Play Pals, makers of Good Guys and other fine toys.
It's like children had become these little consumerist monsters who could, coerce their parents into getting them more and more stuff that they didn't need.
Well, what do you think?
I want a good guy to go with it.
I know you do, Andy, but I didn't know about it in time this month to save up for it.
I remember my mother telling me a crazy story about fighting someone in a dark alley for a Cabbage Patch Kid.
I got my doll! I got my doll!
We can see this line between the direct-to-children as consumers advertising on the one hand and the potential consequences of what that brings into the home on the other.
I was asking for them to create a doll that had never been created before, to do things on film that had never been done before. This is a breath before CGI. There was no way out. It was all on camera, live or die. We built the apartment up, the apartment set, 4 feet off the ground. We punched holes through the set behind the doll so you couldn't see the wires directly behind it. I mean, I used every trick in the book to try to maintain the illusion that the doll was alive and moving.
Hi, it's me, Chucky.
What do you think?
I mean, think about it. You're being chased by something this big with a knife. You know, I mean, how do you sell that? Well, didn't we?
Chucky is a piece of horror history. Chucky's face sits on that Horror Hall of Fame board, right next to the guy in the hockey mask, right next to the Michael Myers mask, Freddy's glove. He's in there.
Child's Play was violent, but no one would mistake it for the grim realism of Maniac. Chucky was following a trail blazed by one of the most famous characters in the history of horror, Freddy Krueger.
You know, Nightmare on Elm Street came out in 1984, and I remember seeing that movie, and I was so excited about the fact that, oh, there's a new twist to this subgenre, that now the rules of any sort of world don't apply.
In part 2, we'll see how A Nightmare on Elm Street brought slashers back from the grave.
Freddy is in the imagination of the person he's haunting. And the imagination is larger than life.
Dive into the psychosexual darkness of Candyman.
You have to be able to deliver the scares, and you have to be able to make people talk about it long after you've gone.
Watch as Scream turns the genre inside out.
I thought I was in a documentary about a serial killer, and they're playing this, you know, for laughs.
The Silence of the Lambs makes grisly horror respectable.
Love your suit.
And 21st century anxiety leads to the no-holds-barred terror of Saw and Hostel.
People who don't see these films take them way more seriously than the people who do.
We wanted to make something that was super scary, and we'd inadvertently become known as the kings of torture porn.
With the slasher films, the rock stars are the killers.
You don't know what pain is!
Everybody has this dark side that needs to be filled.
Wes used to call Freddy the bastard stepfather of us all.
This killer that can kill you in your dreams.
It doesn't get much scarier than that.
Be my victim.
He never gonna catch you.
Everybody's a suspect!
I think the fun of Scream is the self-awareness
Oh, you want to play psycho killer?
and the deconstruction of the horror genre.
The entire audience jumped out of their skin.
In a movie, we have a chance to almost externalize the fears that we have.
Could I saw off my leg if I had to?
We invented a whole new term.
Torture porn became the cathartic release.
You have to work with the dark side.
Horror is the only genre where it's flattering if somebody says, oh, I couldn't watch your movie, had to leave.
We're not allowed to be scared anywhere in life. You can't be scared at work, but for 90 minutes, you can be afraid and not be a coward.
After John Carpenter's Halloween made box office history in 1978, slasher films ruled the screen. But by 1984, audience fatigue and critical backlash had taken hold. Slashers looked dead in the water. But the genre was only sleeping.
I'm certainly not the first girl to play a woman character who fights to the death in a battle against a monster. There will always be men and there will always be women who are, forced to be that person. So Nightmare on Elm Street is about a group of 4 kids, teenagers who realize that they've all shared the same nightmare.
Nancy, you dreamed about the same creep I did.
That's impossible.
And they don't really think anything about it until each one of them, one by one, starts dying in their dreams. My character wants to figure out, like, why this is happening, who it is that's killing them. And so the movie's about Nancy's quest to discover Freddy Krueger and why he did it. He did it as an act of vengeance against some vigilante parents who killed him in a boiler room.
Who are you?
Freddy Krueger was a child murderer, and there isn't anything funny about that. They kind of gloss over that later.
The creation of Freddy Krueger, this man who had knives for fingers, who would come to children in their dreams and kill them, was terrifying. It was just a terrifying idea.
I mean, Nightmare on Elm Street is the next quantum leap forward, I think, in horror. I mean, this killer that can kill you in your dreams.
Yeah.
So suddenly you have a slasher.
It crosses into the supernatural. It crosses into the supernatural.
It was the blend of supernatural and slashers.
The rules of any sort of world don't apply. And I think that's what made Freddy Krueger such a unique character. It just took us to a different place.
Wes Craven was a visionary, I think, in terms of fear, understanding what that could be, and maximizing that in these broad strokes, which Nightmare on Elm Street has.
What is one of the earliest things I can think of as a weapon that would have terrified human beings? The cave bear reaching around the corner with this massive mitt with daggers on the end of every finger. That's primal. Even the colors. I read an article on the two most difficult colors for the iris or the retina to see next to each other were those two colors. And then finding an actor who was brilliant and who could bring it to life.
Wes used to call Freddy the bastard stepfather of us all. But when I got the part, I didn't know what I was going to do. And the makeup sessions informed a lot of what I did. They were dabbing at me with that crusty brush and basting me like a turkey with Vaseline so that I picked up the light better. And in comes Johnny Depp and Heather Langenkamp, arguably the two most attractive young people in the world at that moment. And it got me angry and envious of their youth and their beauty and the fact that these two kids had their whole careers ahead of them. And I went, wait a minute, I can use that.
This is just a dream. He isn't real. He isn't real.
Of course, all my fights with Freddy were fantastic, and we would work on them for a long time. Once the camera was rolling, you know, we got into our characters, and I bashed him over the head with a coffee pot.
I think the real reason it had such a massive audience, and still does, is every single one of the films has a really strong, well-written survivor girl.
So something really interesting about Nancy Thompson in A Nightmare on Elm Street is that it's sort of her breaking free from this chain of suburbia being this ideal because her family is broken.
Nancy.
I'm gonna go and get the guy who did it. And I want you to be there to arrest him when I bring him out, okay?
Just tell me who did it. I'll go get him, baby.
Fred Krueger did it, Daddy.
Her father, while I think very loving, is very inept. He refuses to believe her. Her mother's an alcoholic. She breaks free from it by destroying the home, thereby destroying Freddy Krueger, who came because her parents had killed him.
I guess I'd say my very first fans were young gay men, and they told me that they were using Nancy as they faced their folks or their parents or their families in revealing their true selves.
I take back every bit of energy I gave you. You're nothing.
And they expressed to me that it was just like, it was their Freddy, you know, just like that scary thing that they have to face, that they have to fight. I would often listen to all sorts of people talk about what their Freddy was. And I mean, it can be anything, I'm telling you, it can be anything. Kids who were bullied would tell me that they would use the images of Nightmare on Elm Street to help them face bullies in their life.
You think you was gonna get away from me?
I know you too well now, Freddy.
You know, Wes Craven probably never knew how many people he was going to help by creating this Nancy-Freddy dynamic.
It seems to me there were several peak nightmares, that the first one was really terrifying, but there was a couple others way downstream that were really satisfying and did interesting things intellectually.
There's a lot of echoes to Kafka, you know, and that insects and other things.
Freddy Krueger is pretty terrifying in the first Nightmare on Elm Street.
Watch this.
But he became a one-line reader.
How's this for a wet dream?
Silly, funny, like puns and double entendres.
This is it, Jennifer. Your big break in TV. Welcome to prime time, bitch.
With a joke here, a joke there, a wisecrack here or there, it makes it easier to set them up for another dark sequence or another horrific thing or just a cheap thrill scare.
Got your nose.
Did we go too far? Sometimes, perhaps. And did we load it up too much? Sometimes, perhaps, yeah.
I'll get you, my pretty, and your little soul, too.
You know, I've been, listening to how crowds respond to horror for most of my life. Talking about sort of with the Freddy movies, with the Freddy sequels, how a black theater could, the relationship to Freddy is almost is closer than it is to the victims of those movies.
Of course,
right?
Well, you identify with Freddy.
It's funny. You identify with him. You know him. You don't know these new mother coming to get killed.
Right.
They're just sheep for the slaughter.
By the way, we're identifying with Freddy, the child murderer.
Yes, but black people also love them some Jason and some Michael Myers. There's something about first of all, these characters that don't give a that are cold-blooded, that I think scratches an itch, a frustrated itch, a societally frustrated itch.
That itch would be scratched by a slasher with a hook, a monster driven by love and the need to kill.
Be my victim. Candyman, in a nutshell, it's a dark love story. Virginia Madsen and I were deeply in love in another life. Candyman was an artist, and unfortunately, her father was a racist. Had him lynched, cut off his arm, and replaced with a hook. And he was trying to reclaim his lost love by getting her to honor, him as a mystery man.
What Candyman tried to do was using slavery and some of the violence of slavery to explain the emergence of this monstrous character who, if you say his name into a mirror 5 times, dare you?
Candyman, 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 Candyman.
He comes if you just say his name.
Candyman.
It doesn't get much scarier than that.
Most slasher films start with a traumatic experience that happens as like a sort of a precursor to where the film is set in modern day. The trauma itself serves as a triggering effect for the killer in the present time. What's so interesting about that is that a lot of it is based in loss and grief.
It had a real impact on a lot of audiences, Black audiences, because, hey, even though he's the monster,
Believe
We will turn out to see blacks in a horror film.
It was based on Clive Barker's book, The Forbidden. And I think what Bernard Rose, the director and writer, did brilliantly was to transpose it to Cabrini Green, which is now gone, but was one of the most dangerous housing projects in America.
I thought Candyman was really cool because, you know, you're so used to seeing these traditional haunted house movies, and it's like the opposite. The setting is so gritty.
I think Candyman is intended more for a white audience. It's looking at kind of the fear of the urban setting and Cabrini Green and the sprawl of poverty in Chicago and what might come out of that.
Damn it.
One of the brilliant things about the film is that he doesn't appear into 45 minutes into the film. He's spoken about, they mythologize him.
Everybody's scared. He could come right through these walls, you know? I'm scared. Scared for my child. That he never gonna catch him. Who? Candyman.
I think some audiences were troubled because so many of the people he killed were black. So if it was a straight revenge story, he would have been killing nothing but white people, right? But the residents of this project were also his victims.
If you were to explain, well, it's about this black dude who was murdered for having sex with a white lady, and then he comes back and hunts the white lady and lots of other people too, you'd be like, I don't think we're gonna make that movie. You know what I mean? But somehow, through his level of magnetism and charm, he manages to make Candyman someone, I don't know if they love him, but who they love to fear.
Be my victim. Be my victim. He's got a passion. He wants what he wants, and this is his unrequited love. This is the woman that got away, the woman that he cherished. You know, and it happens to be in a horrific environment, but, you know, you'd do anything for her. Even kill her if they can die together.
Your death will be a tale to frighten children, to make lovers cling closer in their rapture. Come with me and be immortal.
I think that mixture of terror and empathy is very powerful. Every great work of horror fiction is an exercise in extreme empathy. It's about falling in love with characters and then staying with them as they endure the worst.
And he's an iconic monster. He had bees coming out of his mouth. He had bees all over his face.
We used over 100,000 bees on that set. It was all practicals, which is, you know, totally makes a difference. I think I got maybe 26 stings altogether, but they were an essential part to creating the terror for this situation. I mean, what happens to a ghost if he's still living flesh? Will he be inhabited by maggots? We chose bees because they're just that, you know, every kid is afraid of a bee sting.
You know, there's nothing ambiguous about horror. Horror is an engine. It's like a great white shark. It has a purpose, something it wants to do. It wants to scare you. And in that way, that lack of ambiguity is really freeing as a filmmaker, because you know what you're trying to do. It's a beautiful thing to play with, and it's an even more beautiful thing when it works.
Candyman is an icon, one of the great supernatural monsters. But the masked serial killer was ready to make a comeback with a postmodern twist.
Slashers kind of go away for a while. Like, once we're sort of out of weapons, I think the public starts to get bored of it.
Well, there were so many sequels. And they were always diminishing returns.
Exactly, and they were never about being scary, and then Scream comes along.
My whole goal when writing Scream was I wanted a horror movie to sort of live and breathe in a time where the other horror movies existed.
If you were the only suspect in a senseless bloodbath, would you be standing in the horror section?
Kevin was smart enough to make it not about the filmmakers and the actors, but about the audience. Scream is a story of Sidney Prescott, and it's 1 year after the horrific murder of her mother, just when she's about to have some semblance of her normal life, just when she's starting to trust again, and she's starting to date again, and she's got her boyfriend. On the anniversary of her mother's death, murders start occurring, as it looks like perhaps someone takes their love of scary movies too far. And they start using horror movie lingo as a way to stalk and kill victims.
You never told me your name.
Why do you want to know my name?
I want to know who I'm looking at.
What did you say?
The opening of Scream is so iconic at this point, and it's so masterfully done. That is Wes Craven at the height of his career.
It happens. Take it easy.
The thing about Wes Craven is that the scary stuff comes instinctive to him. And I think he has a really great eye and a sensibility to stage it and to craft it. The tracking shots behind Drew Barrymore, she just sort of walks to this shadowed house and she moves in and out of light. It beautifully sets the pace. You know, when to Dutch the angle, when to pull back, when to go wide, when to go close.
The interesting thing about that is you have, at that time, certainly your most famous cast member dying right away. So it really sort of tells an audience you have no idea what to expect. When I auditioned for it, there were two very different scenes. There was one of this loving, caring boyfriend, and then there was one of this psychopath.
We all go a little mad sometimes.
No, Billy!
Wes really wanted to see somebody who could convincingly play both sides of that. Billy's the killer. And you gotta believe fully that he's the killer, so much so that you go, oh, there's no way he's the killer.
I wanted to sort of take the genre, rip it apart, open it up.
There's a formula to it. A very simple formula. Everybody's a suspect.
When you talk about the tone of Scream, I think what he's so successful at is balancing that horror comedy that we don't see so often, pulled off very well.
Devil.
Would you call me?
Huh? Not your friend.
I was quite against it at the time. I thought, wow, I thought I was in a documentary about a serial killer, and they're playing this, you know, for laughs.
Wes found the right balance in the tone through the editorial process, but I do remember we were like, should he be falling down that much? He's kind of like the clumsiest killer alive. And we were always worried about that skirt he was wearing, you know, how silly that would look. But it all seemed to work out.
Yeah, at the beginning, they wanted me to come meet for Skeet's role, Billy.
I didn't do anything. Do you wish to give up your right to speak to an attorney and have him present?
But at the role of Dewey, I thought it was so funny. He was written as like this big, buff, like, meathead. I was like, I think I could bring a different meathead quality to it.
People treat me like I'm the Antichrist of television journalism.
I don't think you're that bad.
No.
My favorite part about working on the Scream movies was working with Wes Craven. You meet few people in this world that turn out to be your heroes, like living heroes. And he held himself like a professor. He was a really intelligent guy. But he'd say things like, well, that was horrible. You want to try again?
You really have to respect your audience. You have to know these kids are damn smart, you know? The wonderful thing about the Scream series was that Kevin Williamson said, yeah, I've seen all the movies too, and let's talk about them, but this is not like that, you know?
Help me, please. I'm at Stu Mucker's house on Turner Lane. It's 261 Turner Lane, please. He's gonna try and kill me.
These movies get a bad rap for sort of being anti-feminist and misogynistic because they are, you know, or they have been. You know, what's great about genre today is we can change all of that. We don't have to sort of adhere to, you know, the rules. In the 70s and 80s, if a girl had sex, the rule was she had to die.
There are certain rules that one must abide by in order to successfully survive a horror movie. For instance, number 1, you can never have sex.
We allowed her to have sex. So you're almost ensuring she's gonna die. But not in this movie. Right up to the very, very end where she's like, this is the moment where the killer
comes back to life for one last scare.
And she just ain't gonna have it. It was just another way to dismiss those old notions of the final girl, and so that we can move our heroine into sort of a new place.
Not in my movie.
Horror gets a visceral reaction out of people, and it's always looked down upon by critics to this day. It astounds me. Horror starts from kind of a minus 25 position and has to claw its way upwards. It's fun to turn that on its head. I think where that anarchistic sense of wanting people to burn the theatre down comes from wanting to show people like what horror can really do.
Good evening, Clarice.
If you hate us and you think we're bad, then I'm really gonna go for it.
A census taker once tried to test me. I ate his liver with some fava beans and a nice Chianti.
Silence of the Lambs is a perfect film. It kind of shirked the in-your-face, occasionally vulgarities of the horror genre and painted them with a much finer brush that made it a story that was about being human as opposed to a story that was about the horrors of the world.
What is your worst memory of childhood?
Death of my father.
Horror is a ghetto as far as the film industry is concerned, but Silence of the Lambs changed everything. It suddenly was not only big box office and not only horrific, but respected. You have Sir Anthony Hopkins.
I'll help you catch him, Clarice.
You had Jonathan Demme, a great admired director, dipping their toes into really unsavory material, but done in such a highly polished and Hollywood style that you could not deny the power of it and the intelligence of it.
There's things we need to do for her. I know that y'all brought her this far and that her folks would thank you if they could for your kindness and your sensitivity. But now, please, go on now. Let us take care of her. Go on now.
I think with Silence of the Lambs, having a fantastic female protagonist that is brought to life by Jodie Foster gave it a life that allowed people who do not appreciate the horror genre to appreciate that performance. And that performance was the introduction for a lot of people who are uncomfortable with horror to actually sit back and enjoy it.
Jonathan mentioned to me that perhaps the Clarice Starling character, the Jodie Foster character, was in a way so central to the nature of the film that the music could reflect her character and be a point of view through her eyes. Generally, that type of film might have focused more on the monster, the Lecter character. And I think by switching that up in that film, it humanized the story in a way that I think broadened the appeal of it.
Senator Martin, Dr. Hannibal Lecter.
I mean, Anthony Hopkins, my God, what an iconic performance.
Hannibal Lecter is the most terrifying villain ever put on screen, and he is in that film for about 14 minutes. He's barely in it at all. We only see slightly more of him than we see of the shark in Jaws. And both pictures sort of bring home the idea that what we can't see is scarier than what we can, and that's tremendously effective.
There are these moments where something plays different for white people than it does for black people. Hannibal Lecter, he's a psychopath. He's a white psychopath But for some reason, it's like, yo, I'm cold. Is eating the face? Oh, that's the right there. That is Hannibal Lecter. That's my right there. That's if I'm in anybody in this movie, I'm him. I'm not the who got his face eaten. I'm Hannibal Lecter.
What became of your lamb, Clarice?
It came out in February, and it played right through the year. It was one of those films that just gathered momentum week by week, and it won 5 Oscars.
When Silence of the Lambs was nominated for Best Picture, nobody wanted to call it a horror film. You know, all the press stayed away from the fact that Silence of the Lambs is really a horror film. It's a slasher film.
Get in the truck, and I want to push it all the way up. I really appreciate it.
But a slasher film as Best Picture? No, can't do that. It was an example of what can be done with the genre when it's done just right.
Hey, are you about a size 14?
Sorry?
What is it that people love about going to see horror movies?
I think what we love about it and what the average person loves about it, I think, is different. We'd see a Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Dawn of the Dead, and I go, I want to live there. I want to live inside this movie.
I want to recreate this in my house.
And essentially, we did do that,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But I think for the average person, it's like you can safely experience something demented.
It's also coming to grips with our own mortality. Maybe there's some weird catharsis of like, okay, well, thank God my death could never nearly be as bad as what I just saw.
Yeah.
So maybe it's not so bad. Maybe I'm just gonna fall asleep.
I think it's all dealing with the fear of death. After 9/11, fear escalated to nearly unbearable levels. And that fear was reflected in movies that dared us not to turn away.
I want to play a game.
People always ask me, how do you make a horror film scary? And I think that the only common thread that I've found is when the filmmaker, the director, is truly terrified by the subject matter. You can tell when other people are phoning in and trying to imitate a genre, and you can tell when someone loves it.
I met James Wan at film school. We both loved horror movies. We were both obsessed with The Evil Dead and Dario Argento and The Shining and all the rest of it. We realized we should team up and try to make a movie with our own money. And so we figured out that the cheapest thing we could do would be 2 actors in one room. Finally, we hit upon the idea for Saw. Saw is about 2 men who wake up chained to the wall in this dilapidated, dirty bathroom, basically. They don't know how they got there, but lying between them is a dead body. And they find out that they've been put there by a sadistic serial killer who forces people to play games for their lives.
John Kramer is a mechanical engineer. He's an architect. He is somewhat of a philosopher. He is a master at prosthetics, a bit of a magician of sorts. And with John, what you see is often not what you get.
Whoever brought us here could have killed us by now. But they didn't. They must want something from us.
You got Lee over here, and you got Carrie Elways over here, and you got this guy in the middle, and this strength and this silence. But I always felt his centralness to this story.
The way that I see Jigsaw is kind of the Zen master of sadism.
Hello, Amanda. You don't know me, but I know you. I want to play a game.
His mission, of course, is to help people to see the value of life. And whether we think his methods are appropriate or not, that's a different story altogether.
My family.
There was something about watching human behavior in extreme circumstances in Saw, and I thought to myself, well, could I saw off my leg if I had to? Would I do it? How would I do it? Could I do it?
When you don't have a big star in the lead role and you don't have the money for special effects, The only thing you have going for you is that question, what's going to happen next?
What are you doing?
Both James and I always loved really great twist endings that made you go back and re-examine the movie. We really thought we had something good.
I think I was there about 12 or 13 days, lying in this pool of blood on the bathroom floor. You're quite convinced that he's where he is, and you forget about it in some way.
The biggest reaction that I think I've had in my career was the ending of Saw. That ending when he stands up off the floor.
Which is one of the reasons why I did the film, because I thought it would be a remarkable moment. It was worth doing just for that moment.
And to actually physically see people lose their mind and yell at the screen, I mean, people would just be shouting like, no way, no way. So that was the best feeling, you know, we could have ever had.
The last thing he says before he closes the door to Lee, he says, some people are so ungrateful to be alive. But not you. Not anymore.
Game over.
To me, Saw is that original film, and then all the other movies. They sit over here, and then the original film, to me, sits on its own.
The later Saws, yeah, they became more about the torture, but really they were torture about people who deserved it. The Saw movies, it's the bad guys who are being tortured.
According to your policy, your secretary is older and weaker and therefore less worthy to survive.
By, I think it was Saw 6, where they're going after insurance companies that have denied people their claims, and I don't know, maybe they kind of deserve it in the world of that movie.
I've had skateboarders, 12-year-olds, come up to me, groups of them, and say, yeah, we love those movies.
You have 1 minute to pull the fishhook from her stomach and unlock her device.
And I say, yeah, really, why? Why do you love them? And they say, because they teach you stuff. I was like, what? He said, well, that you need to appreciate your life. And they're not talking about the traps. They're not talking about the blood. They're talking about concepts that resonate in the film. So when you get this little germ of an idea, of a thought, when it's surrounded by that kind of intensity, it makes the germ resonate in a certain way.
One of the issues with the Saw movies, and you can take it however you want, is the fact that we invented a whole new term, torture porn. But we invented it at the very same time America, as a nation, was under world indictment for actually torturing people.
The torture porn cycle of horror films is strongly linked to the height of what George W. Bush termed the War on Terror.
This crusade.
To use any means at our disposal.
This war on terrorism.
The torture porn cycle is kind of the cycle of the extreme horror movie. The can you not look away? Can you believe how far they're taking this? Can you handle it? And I think it really kind of was crystallized with Hostel. A lot of people say it started with Saw. I think the original Saw plays more as a thriller horror movie than a torture porn movie. Hostel becomes a little bit more of the how much can you stand to watch?
When we started making our movies, the term torture porn came out.
I'll give you that one.
All right, I'll take that one.
One of the things about torture porn is that we are no longer afraid of boogeymen. Michael and Jason and those characters lost a certain currency. And what really strikes fear, particularly in the United States in the post 9/11 moment is other people. Other people are frightening.
You're not going?
I've seen this show.
The Hostel franchise speaks truth to power and presents Americans in the way that the world perceives us.
The whole first section of the film, it's kind of done like a teen sex comedy, right? Like before it gets into the horrific scenes, we see Paxton, Josh, and their friend Oli in Amsterdam. And they're just there to party and smoke pot, and especially in a very extended sequence, have sex with prostitutes. It invokes this whole kind of privilege of paying to do something to somebody else.
But it's just like everyone's out for themselves. You're not meeting friends, you're meeting someone who could be the person that's gonna kill and rape and murder you.
You're very patient. I don't remember.
It's 45 minutes.
Yeah, you
until
got
someone gets
45
killed.
minutes.
Yeah, and we kill our first character.
In that time, you are allowing us to identify with the soon-to-be victims, but you're also subtly allowing us to hate them in a weird way, because they're being kind of rude. They're being so American. So by the time you get to the killing, we're half identifying with the killer, half identifying with the victim, and I think that part of it is the weirdest thing about horror. Like, we need to be able to identify with that dark side of us that maybe wants to kill somebody sometimes.
I am an American. I got rights. Get your
What I think is important and interesting about Hostel is that it doesn't allow the viewer to feel that sense that the American is exempt from implication in the war on terror and in the use of torture.
Who are you? Where am I?
I guess it's kind of like a pushback, kind of like, oh, you think you rule the world? You don't.
The first extended scene of torture that we have is of this kind of privileged, young, white American male. And we see his body kind of taken away secretively to this foreign torture center and tortured in an act that reminds us of the Extraordinary Rendition program. And the viewer identifying with Josh, is forced in a position of having to imagine themselves as being subject to torture.
There are people that, watch torture videos and you pay a certain amount and you can become Mr. Director. And the fact that that exists internationally in much poorer countries where, maybe the parents have died and the kids are easier to get, it's a really disgusting quality that exists in humanity that we don't even want to talk about. And I think that's why we just got a little peek of a window into it in Hostel, and it was too much for most people to accept.
The real world is much scarier than anything that Eli Roth or Stephen King could come up with. It's a really disturbing, sick, violent world we live in. Horror films reflect that, and horror films are a way of people coming to terms with the violence in society, trying to deal with it and trying to, escape it in a lot of ways.
We're not allowed to be scared anywhere in life. I hear from soldiers on military bases that were watching Hostel and watching my films and screaming. And they're dealing with death, but they're not allowed to be afraid. But for 90 minutes, you can be afraid and not be a coward. More than any other monster in horror, the slasher taps into our primal fear of the predator. And when that predator comes in human form, you have to wonder, will I be the resourceful survivor? Or just another kill?
He's gone.
Is there someone inside you?
I love possession films.
Think.
Possession stories touch on our fear of losing control. Control of our bodies, of our lives, of our mind.
One day we could be our normal selves, and the next day be a raging lunatic spouting arcane languages or obscenities.
The soul is mine.
The power of Christ compels you.
The Exorcist is held up as being the holy grail, rightfully so, of possession movies.
And I'm the devil.
The world was afraid of this movie, and they were afraid of me.
The Omen is like my hands-down favorite horror movie.
Look at me, Damien.
There's just something inherently creepy about kids.
Your loved one is not who you assumed they were. And we saw that to wonderful effect in both of the Evil Dead films.
You're bitten by, your girlfriend is possessed, your hand's gonna get possessed, so your hand's gonna attack you.
This looks like something bit you.
Paranormal Activity was a game changer for me.
It was a new way in.
You know, Get Out is a possession film.
It is a possession film. A force that's evil. They have nothing but bad intentions for you.
Oh my God, what am I seeing happening?
The fear that demons will enter our bodies and make us do terrible things has haunted mankind for millennia. In recent times, it has inspired some of the most frightening films ever made. Fever dreams like Night of the Demons and Hellraiser.
We'll tear your soul apart.
Fictionalized case histories such as The Exorcism of Emily Rose and The Last Exorcism. The nightmare of being taken over by a sinister force can be seen as a metaphor for mental illness. But what if these films reflect a deeper truth? A truth about the nature of good and evil.
In the name of Jesus Christ, the saints and all the angels, I command you to reveal yourself!
Demons are real. We're so used to seeing the world in just very few dimensions, time and space, depth and appearance. There is so much more at work in our universe than that which just meets the naked eye.
Though our fears are ancient, films about demonic possession are a relatively recent phenomenon. Hollywood's Motion Picture Production Code set strict moral guidelines on content from the early 1930s to the late 1960s.
There is no room on the screen at any time for pictures which offend against common decency.
Outside of the Swedish film Häxan from 1922, demonic possessions rarely appear on screen until 1973, the year of The Exorcist.
Obviously, The Exorcist is held up as being the holy grail, rightfully so, of possession movies.
The Exorcist is about a priest that had his own demons he had been following years prior. Years later, he finds himself in the same position with the same demon, but this time it's inside of a young girl. The whole thing was to draw on Father Merrin, to get him to do war battle one more time.
Captain Howdy.
Linda Blair's character, Reagan, becomes another person because this demon is inside of her.
I'm Damien Karras.
And I'm the devil. Now kindly undo these straps.
If you're the devil, why not make the straps disappear?
That's much too vulgar a display of power, Karras.
Satan plays the role of Satan. I don't know if that's Satan or a bunch of demons. Doesn't matter.
Where's Reagan?
In here with us.
The actor is really the one selling the idea of possession. So you've got to have a great actor to play somebody who's possessed.
Keep away! This hour is mine.
Billy Friedkin, the director, really wanted to make sure that Reagan was just any generic, all-American little girl.
Her transformation from this very sweet, very typical young girl
Oh, Mom, can't we get a horse?
into a monster, I think comments on this anxiety that the young people of the country were moving away from the conservative norms of society.
It was 1973, so we were recently out of Vietnam, and the hippie movement was still in full swing. There was definitely upheaval going on, social upheaval going on, and generational conflict.
You have a mother who's trying to deal with a daughter who has suddenly become something else. And this is what a lot of parents felt like.
The horror stuff doesn't really come in until like the second half, but the first half is all sort of upsetting images and strange depictions of medical procedures.
It isn't just that medical science is inadequate, it's that medical science is even kind of destructive toward the child. Religion is really the only answer.
You ever heard of exorcism?
By the time the horror stuff happens, the audience is pretty much desensitized. They're already pummeled by the movie that they've seen, and it was extremely manipulative. And not a very nice movie in the sense of being good to the audience.
To confront this cruel demon.
Every time they tracked down the hallway to the door, the audience did not. They wanted to, but didn't. Yes, no, to go into that door.
It's a hard movie to watch. What happens to Linda Blair is just, it's terrible.
The scene where I'm sitting up and down really fast.
What's happening?
It's basically like a metal brace, and then I'm tied in on each side. Unfortunately, they didn't tie it in really good. It fractured my lower spine, so that's what's on camera. And screaming and yelling is real.
My mother had gotten a call saying, can Jamie audition for The Exorcist? And my mother said, no, I don't think so. And then it came out, and we screened it for my 15th birthday. The Exorcist.
Your mother's in here with his cars. Would you like to leave a message?
It freaked me so badly that for the rest of my high school life, my friends made fun of me, and they would taunt me. Dime, why you do this to me, Dime.
Dime, why you do this to me?
Dime, why you do this to me, Dime.
You're not my mother!
That movie scared me so much that I'm Jewish and made me believe in the devil. I would sleep with a rosary next to my bed every night. I have full-blown exorcist PTSD, so.
What an excellent day for an exorcism.
The whole thing about The Exorcist was, like, it may be too intense for human beings. That it wasn't just a horror film in '73 when it came out. It was...
You were experiencing the devil.
Yeah, and that people, like, committed suicide after they saw The Exorcist, or people were put in insane asylums after they saw The Exorcist. And every new issue of the National Enquirer had, you know, my son went crazy and is in a straitjacket. How watching The Exorcist ruined my life.
I dream of reviews like that.
People went back to the church in droves after that film came out.
The world was afraid of this movie. And they were afraid of me, and they wanted to have answers about good and evil. Was the devil really coming?
There's no place to hide your religion, your relationship to God. No, none of that. There's no safe haven anywhere. Even the afterlife isn't safe. I mean, you're gonna get there and be in hell like poor Father Damien. I mean, it's this idea that there's literally no escape, not even if you're dead. That is, you know, to me, the idea of a pure horror movie.
I think it's the greatest horror film ever made, and that's the horror film that I think that will never be duplicated, all right? I don't see...
I agree. I don't think it'll ever be beat. The Exorcist drew on all the resources of Hollywood in the 1970s, one of the peak periods of American film. Decades later, a first-time director shooting in his house proved you don't need a big budget or special effects to bring a demonic possession to terrifying life.
You feel it watching me?
In 2007, software engineer Oren Peli decided to make a low-budget movie about a demonic possession. The result was Paranormal Activity, the most profitable film of all time, and one of the most unnerving movies ever made.
Oren made the movie for $15,000. He shot it at his house. He had a crew of about 3 people.
The crew consisted of my girlfriend at the time, and then my best friend, Amir. I told him, I'm going to shoot a movie. Do you want to help me? And he said, sure, it sounds fun, but I don't know anything about making movies. I said, perfect, neither do I.
All right, we're operational, babe.
Shot entirely in the found footage style, the story follows Mika and Katie, a young suburban couple who move into a new house that seems to be haunted. In fact, Katie is being tormented by a demon that feeds off of negative energy.
Something out there.
There is a difference between a ghost and a demon. Ghosts are simply the spirits of people who died. They don't want to move on, and they kind of linger around in their own dimension. But demons are inherently evil. They want to possess people.
I feel it. I feel it breathing on me.
But a demon is attached to a person. Leaving the house doesn't really solve anything. They're still going to follow you wherever you're going to go.
Amber, it's not the house. It's me. You know, wherever I go, it goes.
Mika sets up cameras to record the supernatural events, which makes things worse.
It felt very much like what would happen to anyone if they were going through that.
What is your quest?
The sounds, wanting to record it, playing with the Ouija board.
Something to say?
That moment.
When you just don't get a Ouija board.
Yeah.
You're like,
oh, I have this like, run, mother, run.
As the couple grows more desperate, the demon trying to possess Katie grows stronger and stronger.
Just let's go. Please, let's go.
Paranormal Activity was a game changer for me because it just showed with a minimalist approach, you can scare out of people with mostly pacing and the way you tell the story. I mean, like what happens in that movie? A couple sheets come off, you know, the bed, a girl gets pulled through the door, and yet when they come up on like day 28 or whatnot, and you know about to go down, I remember the entire audience going, oh.
There's something about the vulnerability that you have while you're asleep, and which I think is something very kind of like ingrained in human nature from the days we were cavemen, and you don't know if a tiger is going to come into your cave and kill you while you're asleep.
And the fact that that movie shattered that space and said, well, when you go home tonight, you're going to be thinking about what this couple endured in that bedroom. It's incredibly effective.
Paranormal Activity's goal was simple: to scare the audience.
Jen?
The horror comedy Jennifer's Body had a serious and uniquely feminist agenda, using demonic possession to comment on the hell of being a teenage girl in a culture obsessed with appearance.
Hey, Jennifer. You look really pretty.
What up, Craig?
Jennifer is a alpha female bitch who is beautiful and popular, and Needy is her worshipful, nerdy friend. Jennifer is actually a really intelligent, clever, interesting person, but nobody cares about that.
Jennifer is cursed before she is cursed because
all people can do is look at her as opposed to engage with her. It's an incredibly dehumanized place to be living in.
She does have this incredible power that comes with her beauty. She uses it.
These are like smart bombs, okay? You point them in the right direction and it gets real.
But it's not nearly as satisfying to her as when she actually gets these supernatural powers. Jennifer is the victim of a demonic ritual gone wrong. This rock band, in an attempt to become famous,
Do you know how hard it is to make it as an indie band these days?
attempt to murder her because they think she is a virgin and that they are sacrificing a virgin. But she is not a virgin. And as a result, the spell goes haywire, and Jennifer is possessed by a demon and starts eating boys to satisfy the demon, and Needy has to stop her. I am rooting for Jennifer when I watch the movie. It's this idea of just being like hot and invincible.
I feel so scrumptious.
It was about how teenage girls are objectified. It was about female sexual appetites. It was about the idea of puberty being a transformative thing and using a sort of a monstrous transformation as a way of talking about that.
The notion of the female as monstrous in itself has been a central tenet of horror, and that's what remains profoundly meaningful to me about horror, is it's one of the few genres that's had the guts to say, as a culture, we are terrified of women and girls.
Hi.
It was so freeing for me to be able to explore those themes in a completely just heightened, gory, bananas atmosphere. You know, they have this fight at the end of the movie, and Needy stabs Jennifer in the heart. It's like my way of saying, like, you're all staring at this girl's breasts.
No, your heart.
But what this is really about is her feelings. You don't get to do over-the-top stuff like that in a more understated genre. You can only do that in a horror movie.
You know what? You were never a good friend.
Jennifer's Body got a mixed reception on its release, but the director's cut is now a cult favorite.
You got a tampon?
Stylistically, it owes a debt to one of the most influential cult movies of all time, The Evil Dead. When it comes to demonic possession movies, few can match the manic energy and no-holds-barred horror of Sam Raimi's film, The Evil Dead.
Hey, Scotty, what's this place like anyway?
Well, the guy that's renting it says it's an old place. A little run down, but it's right up in the mountains.
The Evil Dead is about a group of fairly dumb college kids who go out to a remote cabin in the woods to have a fun little break. They see the cabin. They should be running in the opposite direction to the nearest Motel 6, but instead they go in. They promptly find a reel-to-reel recorder in the basement, which of course they play. It contains demonic incantations that wake up the dead. The dead rise and proceed to possess these kids one by one, and carnage and mayhem ensues.
It seems like the simplest setup, but man, oh man, it was relentless.
And you're just like blown away.
Why have you disturbed our sleep? Awakened us from our ancient slumber. You will die!
What is fascinating about the possession genre of horror films is your loved one is not who you assumed they were. That's the most terrifying thing. And we saw that to wonderful effect in both of the Evil Dead films.
And it was this grainy 16mm movie that you could tell was like made by amateurs with that kind of like single spotlight lighting and everything else. But at the same time was really scary. And I mean, Sam was trying to make a scary movie.
The first person had to get injured by one of these demons. So we did it, first character is kneeling down and the demon gets a pencil and stabs it in the ankle. That one got a big reaction out of the audience because I don't think they knew how visceral the movie was going to be until it started.
I fear that the only way to stop those possessed by the spirits of the book is through the act of bodily dismemberment.
So whenever you hear that you can only stop something through bodily dismemberment, you know you're going to be in for a good show of gore and horror, right?
There is always the standard aspect of the Scream Queen. Sam wanted to up it. He thought it was one thing to have a woman scream, but what if you made a man scream like a girl? Like, I want it to be that horrifying.
There was also something else about Evil Dead that made it particularly cool was, well, you had to get it. Not everyone could get it. It was cheap. So you had to be able to not just look beyond that, you had to embrace that. It is scary, but there is a really weird sense of humor that if you're not in line with it, you're gonna think, oh, that's just a piece of junk.
In 1981, The Evil Dead launched the career of its gifted director, 21-year-old Sam Raimi. 6 years later, Raimi returned with Evil Dead 2, a wildly creative remake of the first film.
With Evil Dead 2 in particular, I think Sam Raimi just said, you know what? Let's just go for it. Let's just embrace the fun.
You're bitten by, your girlfriend is possessed, your hand's gonna get possessed, so your hand's gonna attack you. So it was just a long, grueling sequence.
It's like, get the Three Stooges, but give them a chainsaw. And see what would happen.
If you're a movie-mad young guy in your early 20s and you see Evil Dead 2 and you see that shooting style, it's like, well, what's the point of ever shooting any movie not like that?
I know.
All right, that seemed like, okay, a new shooting style has been developed and everything else looks old-fashioned by comparison. Every single thing just seems old-fashioned and dated unless you're doing that.
The Evil Dead pitted a regular guy against a horde of demons. But what chance do you have when you're up against Satan himself? Christianity teaches that Jesus Christ was the Son of God, born of mortal woman. What if Satan decided that he too would father a child? In 1968, Roman Polanski's film Rosemary's Baby explored the links between pregnancy, parenthood, and demonic possession.
Rosemary's Baby is a really interesting film because artistically it's one of the best films to come out in that era and probably ever.
I'm Rosemary Woodhouse.
We're in 7E.
That movie made $30 million back when movies didn't make $30 million, not on their first run. I mean, if a movie made $12 million, oh, wow, that's a smash.
It's a phenomenon.
It was a phenomenon. And the devil had never been dealt with in that realistic a form before.
It's a hugely important film because it's portraying a woman at the height of second-wave feminism. It also coincides with a rise in interest in all kinds of alternative religions and occultism that was happening in the 60s.
It was a period where there was, questioning, God, the existence of God. I think it was even on Time magazine, is God dead?
No, you're not religious, my dear, are you?
But I was brought up a Catholic. Now I don't know.
In Rosemary's Baby, the heroine is drugged by Satanists. Then the devil literally enters her through rape.
She's awake, she sees.
Can't see nor hear, she's like dead, now sing.
Rosemary becomes pregnant with Satan's child.
This is no dream. This is really happening.
Rosemary's Baby was a possession movie. It was about someone carrying the seed of Satan within her and giving birth to Satan's child. This is actually how Satan or his minions can infest each of us and draw out the evil within us.
It, to me, remains a metaphor about domestic violence, about emotional violence in relationships between men and women, largely inflicted by men onto women.
I didn't want to miss baby night.
You...
And a couple of my nails were ragged, and it was kind of fun in a necrophile sort of way.
When I saw Rosemary's Baby when I was very young, I don't think I thought, oh, this is female consciousness. But obviously, there aren't that many movies from within a young woman's point of view. We know Polanski's guilty of all these things in his personal life, but as a filmmaker, he's incredibly sympathetic to the female point of view. And the relationship between Rosemary and her husband is fantastic.
John Cassavetes' amazing performance as the desperate actor who will do anything to get that big break.
Let's have a baby, all right?
Rosemary is very much the lovely, submissive wife who is there to help her husband out, and what that gets her is getting impregnated by the devil. Her husband basically sells her to Satan in exchange for a Broadway hit.
Oh, I've got the part. That's a hell of a way to get it.
One of the things I really love about horror and the nightmares that it touches on are the idea of security and a stable, normal place that turns out to be a place of danger, or a person who seems to be a friendly person. And of course, one of the greatest things in Rosemary's Baby is the neighbors.
The central figure in this patriarchal crush is Ruth Gordon.
Hi, dear. We're not bothering you, are we? I heard you come in. It certainly wasn't very long.
Who comes in with her multicolored scarves and her accent and delivers a series of death blows to everything that the poor Rosemary stands for.
Here. What is in it? Tannis root. Remember that. Remember some other things.
They're the kind of neighbors you kind of, all right.
You sort of want to avoid them, but you're nice to them, but they're harmless.
They're harmless. And that they are, you know, essentially agents of the devil.
We're your friends, Rosemary. There's nothing to be afraid of, Rosemary. Honest and truly, there isn't.
Another thing that I think young women really can relate to in Rosemary's Baby, no one believes her.
One thing is for sure, they have a coven and they want my baby.
Certainly seems that way.
To me, there's no scarier moment in the movie than when you realize her doctor has turned on her. The feeling of the person that you've put your ultimate trust in, like your obstetrician, this guy who's like tending to your body and your femininity, and he is handing you over to the Satanists.
We've got to go home and rest. That's all it takes.
Nothing supernatural happens, actually, for the entire course of the movie. You know, she could just be paranoid. She could be suffering from some weird pregnancy delusions.
What have you done to it? What have you done to its eyes?
He has his father's eyes.
It's not until she actually says, you know, what have you done to his eyes, that there is finally a physical manifestation of what she's been talking about.
God is dead! Satan lives!
I made the mistake of showing it to my wife after I got her impregnated.
Oh, God!
She's like, I've never seen it. I said, you've never seen Rosemary's Baby? We're watching Rosemary's Baby. I didn't think about how weird that might be for someone who was pregnant. It really played on her fears that we were going to have the Antichrist as a child. It was a bad call.
Rosemary's Baby is a movie about the dark side of pregnancy. Richard Donner's film The Omen takes things one step further, with a violent vision of parents at the mercy of the ultimate problem child, the spawn of Satan.
When the Jews return to Zion, and a comet fills the sky, the Holy Roman Empire rises, and you and I must die.
Released in 1976, Richard Donner's film The Omen revolves around every parent's secret fear that their sweet young child is a demon in disguise.
The Omen is the story of an American diplomat, played by Gregory Peck, who takes a child home from the hospital that is not his own and sets up shop and seems to have this beautiful life in England. And then the whole thing starts to unravel and we discover that the child is actually the son of the devil.
The Omen is like my hands-down favorite horror movie. It's intellectually a little bit above par than the average thing you would watch it at the video store, right?
Right. It was a big budget movie. Richard Donner, that was a huge
Gregory
deal.
Peck is great in it. Lee Remick's great in it. So I just thought it hit on all, you know, the quality was really high on all the different facets.
Gregory Peck in a horror movie. That was kind of a big deal, having an actor of his stature.
He was a 50s era, established, older Hollywood legend that was now appearing in this horror film. And he gave it, and along with Lee Remick, gave it this patina of class.
Peck was going through a terrible time in his life. His son was found dead. He was so devastated. And his agent said, I gotta get him out. I gotta get him up on his feet. I gotta get him working. We pitched him. Greg, it's a strong mystery. The suspense is incredible. And on top of it, it's a thriller.
Damien, the adopted boy in The Omen, does not seem to be aware that the devil is inside him. But as he grows older, Satan's agents begin infiltrating his life. They send a sinister Rottweiler to protect him. And, in an infamous scene, they possess his nanny at his 5th birthday party.
Look at me, Damien.
Damien, this is for you. Like,
And you weren't
she
expecting
kills
it,
herself
yeah.
at the kids' party.
Yeah.
In The Omen, we don't really know that Damien is the Antichrist. Neither does Gregory Peck. It's not until somewhere towards, the beginning of the second half that you really come to terms with the fact that they're harboring the Antichrist. So the movie has a story to tell, and then it's going to be what do they do about it?
They cast it well. They cast the son of the devil well.
When you can get like a good performance out of children in a horror movie, there's like nothing more effective. There's just something inherently creepy about kids. Even my own children, if they wake me up in the middle of the night and they're just standing motionless next to the bed, I'm briefly scared. And I made them.
Casting that child, we did one scene where I said, I'm gonna grab you, and you want to get away. Grab this kid, and we're rolling, and he kicked me in my privates. So hard that I just threw my hands up and said, cut, hire him.
After Damien nearly kills his mother, Peck's character searches for the boy's true parents. His quest triggers an avalanche of violence and death. The spectacular staging of these scenes is one of the reasons The Omen is considered a horror classic.
I wasn't prepared for how scary it was going to get. Forget about the gore in it and everything. That didn't see that coming at all. Just the
music.
Rottweilers surrounding them in the graveyard was like, oh my God, what's going to happen? But then the decapitations, I mean, that was very scary. I never saw that coming.
At the end of the movie, we dropped the camera, and it revealed the back of the kid, because I was right behind the camera. Kid turned and looked at me, and he had this severe face on. And I said, don't you smile. Don't you dare smile. And he started to fight the smile, and then he couldn't fight it anymore, and he kind of lit up. It was like blow up, the end of a movie. Was this real? Am I really the devil? Did this really happen? And it changed the whole movie. I never had children. They scared the hell out of me.
At their core, possession movies are about the fear of losing yourself, of a demon taking control of your body and your mind. In 2017, Jordan Peele's Get Out took that idea and used it to hold a mirror up to America.
Good to see another brother around here.
A young black man meets another young black man.
Yes, of course it is.
But something is very wrong here. Jordan Peele's Get Out is by turns a social satire and a genuinely horrific tale of demonic possession. But the demons here aren't from hell.
Get out. Sorry, man.
Okay. Get out! I love, love, love possession films.
Hello.
Hi.
My mother used to do this thing to me, play this little joke on me. Every now and then, I would go, Mom, can I get this candy or whatever? And she would look at me and she'd go, Mommy's not here anymore, Jordan. And I'm like, don't do it. Like, come on. Mom. She'd be like, I'm serious. Mom isn't here.
Who was she?
Right. That's the question. That's the question I've never answered.
All I know is sometimes, but if there's too many white people, I get nervous, you know?
Get Out is a possession film.
It is a possession film.
Instead of the devil possessing you, it's literally the white devil possessing your
into
body.
It.
Oh, no.
There haven't been a lot of movies that deal with race straight on in the genre space.
Do they know I'm black?
No.
And I wanted this movie to be, you can't do this movie with a white guy.
My dad would have voted for Obama a third time if he could have. Like, the love is so real.
In a nutshell, it's a story of a black guy who meets his white girlfriend's parents and kind of gets more than what he's expecting, in a nutshell.
I would have voted for Obama for a third term if I could. Best president in my lifetime, hands down.
I agree.
Yeah.
There is a genuine mystery going on in the case of Get Out. The audience knows, okay, there's something weird about this family. There is definitely something weird about those black servants. There's something weird about this whole damn place. But exactly what, you don't know. But now you're really watching, because now you're watching a mystery. Jordan Peele knows exactly what he's doing. And we're just gonna have to wait for it.
Do you find being African American has more advantage or disadvantage?
Being black in America, there's certain dials you're sort of tuned in to not walk into a situation.
I got hypnotized last night. Get out of here. Yeah, to quit smoking, but it's Rose's mom's a psychiatrist, so.
Bruh, I don't care if the bitches are Yana Van Zant, okay? She can't fix my life. You ain't getting in my head.
Chris always thinks he's got the situation at hand because they're like a bunch of white people. What are they gonna do?
We're kind of like, we can forgive him. Oh, he's not being dumb. Is he really going to think, jump to the conclusion that this family is literally evil, physically threats? Like, that's crazy.
Now, sink into the floor.
Wait.
Sink.
The minute Chris is sent into the sunken place, I realized that this movie was not just going to be scary and not just going to be interesting, but also going to be important. Because he created a metaphor that now gives so many of us language to explain what a state of suppression looks like and feels like.
Now you're in the sunken place.
When you're in the sunken place, you can still see what's happening. You're not unaware. It's just that you feel there's nothing you can do about it. Someone or something has taken control over you, so therefore you're powerless. And it doesn't matter what color, where you come from, you can be in the sunken place just by not having a voice.
In a pivotal scene in Get Out, we discover all the black people Chris has met on the estate have been sold at auction. Their bodies have been taken over by white people who desire their youth and physicality. They are trapped in a sunken place, yearning for freedom.
It's really a Trojan horse for telling a much more important story.
Where the country is certainly helped propel the success of Get Out, and also made Get Out a particularly important movie for its time, in a way that, you know, it wouldn't have been. And I wish that that weren't true, but it is.
I mean, at the end of the day, the movie is about how racism is horrifying. It's the most horrific thing in our world today. It's just people just hating other people for whatever reasons they do.
What is your purpose, Chris?
What? In life.
Is there a better statement on race relations in America? I don't think so, you know. And that's totally pushed the bar on satire and horror and cut very deep at the same way as being entertaining.
And that's what genre movies do at their best, especially great horror movies. It gives you a way to discuss the undiscussable.
Yes.
It gives you a context to talk about subjects that are just awful and painful for everyone, but you can put it in the context of a scary movie, whether it's a zombie movie, whether it's Get Out movie, and it's like you're suddenly allowed to talk about it.
And everybody needs it. Even if it's not in the package of a horror movie, everybody has this dark side that needs to be filled.
I mean, I told you not to go in that house.